This is the story of Terrence Hale, a single black father in Atlanta, whose small act of kindness, giving shelter to a lost girl during a storm, unleashed a cascade of threats, lies, and corporate power. What he didn't know was that the girl wasn't who she said she was. And what no one expected was how deep Terrence's memory ran, or how far he would go to protect his son from the system that once tried to erase him. It started with rain. Not the light kind that kisses windows, but the kind that drenches the soul, thick, punishing, relentless. Terrence Hale had just gotten off his shift as a night nurse at Grady Memorial. He was tired, soaked through his scrubs, and his mind was already halfway home to Malik, his 8-year-old son, probably curled up with cartoons and too much cereal. The headlights caught a figure slumped against a bus stop bench. Her hair was matted to her cheeks, her hoodie weighed down like a wet rag. She didn't look up as his car slowed. She just sat there shaking. Terrence rolled down the window. "Miss you all right?" She didn't answer at first, then nodded without conviction. "I lost my wallet. And my phone. I don't know anyone here." She sounded young. Maybe 20. Her voice carried something deeper than fear, exhaustion. He looked at the empty passenger seat. He'd grown up in state care. He knew that look. He knew that rain. "Look," he said cautiously. "I've got a warm place not far. My kid's home. You can dry off, get some food. Just for the night. That's all." She looked at him then. Really looked. And nodded. That's how Jenny came into their lives. She barely spoke the first day. Just thanked him in whispers and helped Malik build a Lego spaceship at the kitchen table. She said she was a college student studying art therapy, that she had a sister in Augusta but couldn't reach her. Her story had the kind of holes you don't patch when you're drowning. But she stayed. For 10 days, Jenny became a part of their rhythm. She helped with dinner, brushed Malik's hair into a decent shape before school, and fell asleep most nights on the couch with a book open on her chest. She laughed at Terrence's corny jokes. She cried during a documentary about children in foster care. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't try to run. He should have asked more questions. On the morning she left, she folded the blanket with perfect hospital corners, left a note on the fridge that read, "Thank you for seeing me." Then she was gone. Terrence didn't think much of it. He figured she'd found her way back to her people. But that same afternoon, his phone rang. "Unknown number. You really thought you could take advantage of my daughter and get away with it." The voice was icy, controlled, white. "This is Vincent McBride, CEO of Pharmaxis. And if you think you can shelter a vulnerable girl and come out clean, you're more naive than I thought." Terrence blinked. "Sir, I don't know who." "You'll lose your job, your license, and your son. You will watch your life burn down from the inside. I don't care what you meant to do. The optics are already mine." Then the line went dead. Malik came into the room seconds later, clutching a drawing of a dragon he'd made for Jenny. "Is she coming back for it?" Terrence couldn't answer. His hands were trembling. The storm hadn't ended. It had just gone quiet. He tried to brush it off. Maybe some mistake, some entitled jerk playing phone threats. But the next morning, his hospital badge wouldn't scan at the staff entrance. A security guard escorted him into a boardroom where HR and compliance sat waiting. "We've received a formal complaint," they said, "about inappropriate behavior outside the workplace." He was told he'd be placed on temporary leave pending investigation. No details given. No accuser named. That evening, Malik's school emailed his tuition assistants had been flagged and suspended due to pending legal considerations. His bank app wouldn't load. His rent payment bounced. Still, he didn't panic. Not yet. Because Terrence Hale had grown up in a place where panic meant defeat. In shelters in boys' homes, in the office of caseworkers, with eyes that never met his. He had learned early how to record every intake form, how to memorize every lie adults told him. He knew how systems erased people like him quietly, administratively, without a trace. So when the next call came, another unknown number, more threats, Terrence pressed record without flinching. He already had a folder on his desktop titled Rainfall. In it were time-stamped clips, Jenny helping with dishes, Jenny reading to Malik, Jenny crying at the table after a nightmare. Not because he'd ever planned to use them, but because documentation was how he'd survived. And now survival was no longer enough. He'd named the folder Rainfall because it felt right. Because the night Jenny arrived, something shifted. And now that folder full of quiet dinners, blurry smiles, and late-night whispers was the only thing standing between Terrence Hale and a full-blown disaster. The system hadn't knocked this loudly in years, but he recognized its rhythm. First came confusion, then suspicion, then erasure. Within 48 hours of Jenny's departure, Terrence lost access to his employee health portal. His insurance claim for Malik's asthma medication was rejected. Calls to HR went unanswered. When he checked his mailbox, there was a letter from the State Board of Nursing. An ethics complaint had been filed anonymously. Allegations of inappropriate conduct with a vulnerable female in his home. He hadn't even touched her. Had barely asked her anything beyond "Are you okay?" But that didn't matter. This wasn't about truth. It was about leverage. And someone powerful was using every inch of their reach to make sure he disappeared before anyone asked questions. Malik, in his innocence, still talked about Jenny like she might walk through the door at any moment. He left the dragon drawing by the window, saying it would help her find her way back. Terrence didn't have the heart to move it, but his hands were busy elsewhere. He spent sleepless nights organizing timestamps, backing up files to offline hard drives, revisiting hospital protocols for evidence chains. He didn't know what kind of war Vincent McBride was waging, but he knew how to build armor. Not loud, not messy, strategic. Still, it was Malik's school that broke him. That Monday, Terrence arrived early to drop off his son. They were halfway to the entrance when the front office manager stepped outside. "Mr. Hale, we've had a concern raised," she said gently, avoiding eye contact. "Malik will need to remain off campus until we clarify some things with our district's legal counsel." Terrence blinked. "Clarify what it's about the visitor who stayed at your residence. A young woman. There are questions about her age." He stared at her in disbelief. "She was a guest," he said slowly. "She needed help. Nothing happened. I'm sorry, Mr. Hale. We're not allowed to comment further at this time." Malik didn't understand. "Did I do something wrong?" Dad Terrence crouched and shook his head. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong." But he did. He had the audacity to be kind, the gall to give a stranger warmth, and now his son was being punished for it. That night, after Malik fell asleep, curled up next to him on the couch, Terrence stood in the kitchen with shaking hands and pulled out the number he hadn't called in years. Julia Grant, the old caseworker, retired now. But she had been the only adult in his childhood who ever saw him clearly. She had testified for him once when no one else would. He stared at her name and called. "Terrence." Her voice came cautious but steady. "It's happening again," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "Only this time it's not me they're trying to erase. It's my son." By the end of the call, she was already in motion. 2 hours later, she was sitting in his apartment flipping through a manila folder marked The Horizon Trial. "What is this?" Terrence asked. "Jenny isn't just some lost girl," Julia said grimly. "Her real name is Kara Jameson. She was one of the test subjects in an off-the-books medical program, Pharmaxis, funded between 2012 and 2016. Terrence stared at the photos. Children in hospital gowns, blank eyes, file after file of subjects with sealed juvenile records, and clinical notes full of terms like non-consensual guardianship waived and experimental Class D compound. These were all kids in the foster system, Julia said. Pharmaxis partnered with a now-defunct behavioral health facility. They tested unapproved medications under the guise of treatment. Most of these children were classified as wards of the state. No parents, no legal advocates. "And you're saying Kara Jenny was one of them?" Julia nodded. "She vanished 2 years ago." Everyone assumed she was dead. Terrence sat back, heart racing. Why come here? Because you're the only person who didn't treat her like a file. Maybe she thought she could trust you. Trust. It wasn't something Terrence gave easily, but she had trusted him. With silence, with tears, with Malik. And now she was gone. The question wasn't just where Kara was. It was who else Pharmaxis wanted to disappear next. She was gone, but not without a trace. Terrence sat at his kitchen table, long after Julia left her folders, and warnings still echoing in the air. She trusted you, Julia had said. But trust wasn't protection. Not in a world where power operated behind glass boardrooms and burner phones. And Kara Jenny was still out there. Somewhere. Maybe running. Maybe hiding. Or worse. But there was one thing he hadn't told Julia. Before Kara left, she had given Malik a gift. A worn-out stuffed elephant. Malik had taken to it instantly, dragging it everywhere from the kitchen table to bedtime. Terrence hadn't thought twice about it, until he noticed a small zipper hidden behind its left ear. At first, he thought it was just a torn seam. But it wasn't. It was deliberate. Inside, folded carefully and wrapped in a rubber band, was a flash drive. Black, unlabeled, smooth, and cold like a secret. His palms began to sweat. He didn't open it immediately. First, he closed all the windows, turned off the lights, locked every bolt on the door. Then, he placed the drive into his old laptop, never connected to the internet, and waited. It was encrypted, but the folder names were clear. One read, "Do not trust anyone." Another, "James Bikes, Doctor Number 5." And the last, "If I die, this is why." His stomach twisted. The files inside included PDFs of patient logs, photos of children, some with feeding tubes, some with swollen limbs, scanned copies of internal memos from Pharmaxis, labeled Phase 2, Ethical Clearance Waiver, even redacted emails between Vincent McBride and a medical director named Dr. James Hadley. That name made his blood run cold. Dr. Hadley had treated Terrence once years ago in a state facility when he was just a kid. The man had worn a white coat and a smile that never reached his eyes. He was the kind of doctor who said, "Trust me," while holding a needle behind his back. So this wasn't just about Kara. This was his story too. Terrence's mind reeled. Was he part of this same trial? Were they tracking him all along? He spent hours cross-referencing the data on the drive with old paperwork Julia had left behind. There were overlaps, case numbers he remembered from his own charts, drug names he couldn't pronounce but had seen scribbled on his childhood medical records. But the most chilling file wasn't clinical. It was a voice memo, labeled simply Night 9. Kara's voice, breathy, tired, terrified. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it. Or I ran. Or maybe I was taken again. I don't know. But Terrence, I left the drive with Malik because you're the only one who didn't flinch when I screamed in my sleep. You didn't treat me like I was broken. You just let me be." She paused. Then, "There's still one. One more kid. She's in the facility, St. Ridge Behavioral, under a fake name. Her real name is Nia. She's 6. I tried to get her out last year, but they moved her. She's the last one who remembers everything. If they find her, they'll erase her. Like they erased all of us." Terrence pressed pause. The silence afterward was unbearable. He closed the laptop slowly, heart pounding. There was another child, alive, imprisoned in a system that buried kids in diagnoses and pharmaceutical trials. And now he knew. Which meant he couldn't look away. Not again. But how do you pull someone out of a black site disguised as a mental health clinic? He needed help. More than just Julia. That's when he thought of Ezra Lee. Ezra was a tech analyst who moonlighted as an independent investigator. Terrence had met him through a patient's family years ago. He specialized in exposing predatory algorithms and had a knack for digital forensics. If anyone could break open these files and keep it quiet, it was Ezra. Terrence texted him one line, "Need eyes on a ghost. You owe me." Ezra replied within seconds, "Bring it. No Wi-Fi." The next morning, while Malik stayed at Julia's. Terrence met Ezra at a laundromat, one of his safe spots. They spoke in low voices over the sound of dryers thumping. When Ezra saw the drive and the folder names, his brows furrowed. This is next-level corporate darkness, man. If this is real, Pharmaxis isn't just liable. They're criminal. It's real, Terrence said, his voice dry. Ezra looked at him. Then, you've just put a target on your back. Terrence stared out the window. They already aimed. I'm just stepping forward now. Ezra copied the files into an offline terminal. I'll scrub what I can. But you need to be careful. The second this leaks, they'll send someone. Maybe not legal, maybe not obvious. Terrence nodded. Then, let them come. But he wasn't prepared for what was waiting at home. Pinned to his front door was a white envelope. Inside, a photograph of Malik. Taken that morning. The caption, "Watch who you trust." The photo was fresh. It hadn't been taken from a distance or a security cam. It was crisp, intentional, and intimate. Malik walking to Julia's house that morning, his backpack slightly askew, one shoe untied, smiling, unaware. The kind of photo a parent might keep on their desk. But this one had been printed on matte paper and slid into a white envelope with no return address. No words except a single typed warning. Watch who you trust. Terrence's breath caught in his throat. The hallway of his apartment seemed to close in on him, every corner now a blind spot. He turned the photo over in his hands, scanning it for fingerprints, clues, anything. Nothing. But he knew what it meant. They were watching. Not just him, but Malik. He backed into the apartment, shut the door, locked all 3 bolts, and pulled every curtain tight. His chest burned as he grabbed his phone and called Julia. "Keep him inside," he said sharply. "Don't take him anywhere, not even the front porch." "Terrence, what happened?" He paused, then swallowed. "They're escalating." Julia didn't need more. She just said, "I'll keep him safe." That night, Terrence couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the photo, then at his laptop. He opened the voice memo from Kara again, not because he wanted to hear her voice, but because he needed to feel it. To remember what this was really about. Nia. A 6-year-old girl being held in a private behavioral health facility, St. Ridge Behavioral, under a false name. If the files were right, and Kara's recording wasn't part of some trauma-fueled delusion, then this girl was the last remaining witness to the Horizon trials. The last child alive who hadn't been bought off, erased, or buried in silence. And they were already tracking Malik, which meant they knew Terrence was getting closer. He needed more than files now. He needed proof that couldn't be denied, something no PR team could spin or bury. And the only place that kind of truth lived was inside the walls of St. Ridge. The problem, St. Ridge wasn't a place you just walked into. It was a fortress of bureaucracy, privately owned, tax-exempt, with a spotless online presence and a full-time legal team. The kind of place the state used to quietly warehouse unmanageable children, while private firms ran trials behind closed doors. Terrence needed access, and the only way to get it was to become a patient. He shaved the next morning, wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big, walked into an urgent care across town, and spun a story of insomnia, anxiety, and paranoia, just convincing enough to earn a referral. 3 days later, he was admitted on a 72-hour voluntary observation order to St. Ridge. The halls were cold, too clean, the kind of clean that smelled like bleach and power. Inside, he was given a room without sharp edges, a bed that felt more like a tray, and a staff that smiled too much. He kept his eyes low, played his part, nodded when they asked about trauma, lied about hallucinations, let them assume what they wanted. But he watched. He listened. And on the second night, he heard the crying. It came from the east wing, past the therapy rooms, a sharp, stifled sound like a child trying not to sob out loud. Terrence waited until the hallway cameras turned. Then he slipped into the corridor, barefoot, every muscle tight. Through the thin walls, he heard her. A little voice. repeating the same thing over and over. "I didn't forget. I didn't forget. I didn't forget." He pressed his hand against the door. "Nia," he whispered. The voice stopped. Silence. Then, "Who are you?" "My name is Terrence," he whispered back. "I knew Kara." A pause. "Then Kara said you'd come." His blood turned to ice. She was real. And she remembered. But footsteps were coming, orderlies doing rounds. He darted back to his room, heart racing, pulse pounding in his ears. The next morning, they upped his medication dose. He didn't take it. Pocketed the pills instead. On the third night, Nia slipped him a folded drawing during group therapy. It was a crayon sketch. A girl in a cage. A woman outside crying. A building labeled St. Ridge. And something else in the corner, small, easy to miss. A man's face. Smiling. But the smile was wrong. He recognized it. It was Dr. James Hadley. The same man from the Horizon Files. The same one from his own childhood nightmares. He was still here. Still working. And now Terrence knew for sure this wasn't about one child. This was about a system that never stopped. But before he could plan his next move, the door to his room opened without a knock. 2 orderlies stepped in. And behind them, Vincent McBride. In the flesh. Wearing a visitor's badge. "You really thought this would end differently," he said, his voice smooth and venomous. "I told you to stop digging. But some people only learn when they lose everything." Then he looked straight at Terrence. "And now you're going to lose her too." Terrence froze. "Her who?" he asked. Vincent smiled faintly, but said nothing. And that silence was more terrifying than anything he could have said. Terrence didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. Vincent McBride's words had landed like a knife to the chest. But if there was one thing Terrence Hale had learned, it was how to bleed without showing it. He locked eyes with the billionaire, every fiber in his body screaming to protect, to fight, to run. But all he could do was breathe. 1 inhale, 1 exhale. He wasn't sure who Vincent meant by her. Was it Julia? Was it Kara? Or had they somehow gotten to Malik's school again? The possibilities clawed at his chest, but his face stayed still. Blank. Strategic. Vincent smiled. The kind of smile that expected surrender. "Your file's already halfway to the state board," he said. "The medication you've been skipping logged. The incident report we're about to file already drafted. You'll leave this place labeled unstable, unfit to parent, and unemployable in any hospital in this state. If you're lucky." Terrence didn't speak. Vincent stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You should have played your part, nurse. Should have folded when I gave you the chance. But no, you wanted to be the hero. The good guy. Let me tell you something about heroes, Terrence." He leaned in. "They always die first." And then he was gone. The door shut behind him with a soft click, but the weight it left in the room was suffocating. Terrence stood there for several minutes, unmoving, every synapse in his brain firing with silent fury. He had less time than he thought. Whatever they were planning, it was already in motion. He checked the hidden pocket in his sweatpants, where the pills they gave him still sat. He popped the capsule apart, just to be sure. It wasn't a sedative. It was a mild paralytic, a delayed onset dose used in outpatient psych programs to induce compliance during behavioral redirection. He recognized it from his training years ago, but it had been banned in most state-run facilities. St. Ridge was using blacklisted meds, and now they were going to plant it in his system. He flushed the pills down the toilet, cleaned his hands carefully, then reached under the mattress for the crayon sketch Nia had given him. On the back, in tiny, childlike handwriting, she had scribbled 4 words: "He hides in records." Terrence stared at the sentence, trying to make sense of it. He had to be Dr. Hadley. But what did hides in records mean? He thought of his own files, how clean they were. Too clean. Sanitized. Missing years. He needed out. Now. But he couldn't leave without her. That night he made a decision. If they were going to frame him, fine. Let them try. But he was going to walk out of St. Ridge with the truth and with Nia. The next morning, during therapy group, he faked a tremor, just enough to draw attention from the aides. While they scrambled to record his vitals, he snagged a staff keycard clipped to a nurse's hip and slid it up his sleeve. That afternoon, when the cameras reset during shift change, a 15-second window he'd memorized, he moved. He made it to the admin hallway, heart-pounding, limbs tight. Behind a door labeled Records and Archives, he found it. Rows and rows of locked drawers, each labeled by number, not name. But in the back corner, under dust and neglect, was a drawer labeled simply Project Vesta. He opened it. Inside were dozens of thin files, many marked deceased. Some were redacted with black ink. But one had no label at all. He opened it. Photos of him. Age 7, 10, 12. Charts of brain scans. Logs of medication doses. A memo titled, Subject V027B, shows early resilience. Behavioral resistance higher than expected. Recommendation transfer to peripheral observation. Subject. They had experimented on him too. But they didn't remove him, they watched him. For years. Through foster systems, school health reports, even his first job in medicine. And someone had kept it going. He heard footsteps. No time. He grabbed the file, shoved it into his waistband, and ducked into a janitor's closet just as a pair of staffers passed, heart in his throat. He waited. Then moved again, this time to the east wing. To Nia. She was waiting by the playroom window, clutching a doll that looked like it hadn't been washed in months. When she saw him, her eyes widened. "You came back." He crouched beside her. "Can you walk?" She nodded. He took her hand. They slipped out through the fire door near the staff lounge, where Ezra had promised a distraction. At exactly 2:45 p.m., a fake fire alarm was triggered on the west wing, a timed breach that Ezra had coded into the HVAC control system. Orderlies scattered. Terrence and Nia ran. Out the back, across the employee lot, into the alley where Ezra's car waited with the engine running. They didn't speak until they were 3 blocks away. Then, Nia looked up at Terrence and whispered, "There's more. It wasn't just here. They moved some of us. Kara found out. That's why they came for her." Terrence turned to Ezra. "Drive faster." But behind them, a black SUV pulled onto the street and followed. Ezra didn't wait for instructions. The moment he spotted the SUV tailing them, he floored the gas tires, squealing as they cut across 2 lanes of Atlanta traffic. The city blurred into chaos, horns, blaring lights streaking past the windows, while Terrence kept one arm across Nia's chest, like a human shield. The little girl didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just gripped her doll and whispered under her breath, "Kara said this would happen." Terrence glanced back through the rear window. The black SUV didn't have plates. Of course it didn't. It moved with precision, never losing distance, never gaining. Watching. Herding. "Left," Terrence shouted. Ezra jerked the wheel, skidding them into an alley behind a closed convenience store. Trash cans toppled. Nia's doll hit the floor. They kept going. 2 turns later, they were inside the underground garage of an old courthouse, now a tech co-op, where Ezra rented server space. He slammed the emergency brake, leapt out, and hit a panel on the wall. The garage door groaned closed, slow and heavy like a drawbridge, sealing them inside. They didn't breathe until it clanked shut. Terrence lifted Nia out of the car. Her knees were shaking. He sat her gently on a bench and dropped to his own knees in front of her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, clutching the doll tighter. "They know I remember. They tried to make me forget. But Kara told me to remember everything." Ezra pulled a duffel bag from the trunk. Laptop's drives analog gear. He handed Terrence a burner phone. "We've got less than a day before they spin this. We need to hit first. Hard." Terrence opened the folder he'd taken from St. Ridge. The files on Project Vesta. His file. Inside was a second envelope he hadn't seen before. It was marked only with a stamped serial, V027B. Redirected. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph. A grainy image of a much younger him, barely 15, being escorted into a medical van. The back was labeled, Transfer to satellite facility. Witness protection division. Except Terrence had never entered witness protection. He stared at it. What does that even mean? Ezra asked, peering over his shoulder. Terrence's voice was low, steady. They didn't transfer me to hide me. They moved me to monitor me. He flipped to the last page in the folder. It was a transcript of a phone call between Dr. James Hadley and Vincent McBride. Subject V0227B is resilient, the transcript read. He's perfect for long-term tracking. Let him grow. See what kind of man he becomes. If we ever need to kill the story, we can always frame him later. Ezra recoiled. They planned this. Years ago. Since I was a kid, Terrence said quietly. They made me believe I escaped, that I won. But it was all containment. He stood up suddenly, nauseous. The walls of the garage felt too close, the lights too bright. But Nia's voice grounded him. Terrence, she said softly, I remember where they took the others. He turned to her, heart pounding. She reached into the back of her doll where Kara had once hidden the flash drive and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A child's map drawn in markers. It wasn't just St. Ridge. Kara called it the Mirror House. That's where they moved everyone, even the babies. Ezra scanned it. This looks like wait. This is upstate, near the old Reynolds farm. That property's private, Terrence said. Fenced, secured. Which means, Ezra replied, they think no one would ever look there. They made a plan. Ezra would begin compiling all the files, Project Vesta, St. Ridge's internal dosing reports, photos of the children, Kara's recordings, and send it to a contact at Channel 9 News, one of the last local outlets that hadn't been swallowed up by corporate media. Terrence would head north. With Nia. They had no legal leverage, no court order, just evidence and the raw truth of a system that had abused children in silence for over a decade. He texted Julia Malik, stays with you. No questions. I'll explain later. She replied instantly. He's safe. Just come back whole. The next morning, Terrence and Nia drove through dawn mist on the I-85 toward the Reynolds property. She slept in the back seat, hands still wrapped around the doll. He watched the sky change from purple to gray, wondering if he was driving into freedom or into a trap. By noon, they reached the fence. Barbed wire, security cams, motion detectors. Ezra's hacked blueprint said there was a service tunnel near the eastern ridge, an old maintenance shaft from when the place used to be a dairy farm. Terrence and Nia crouched low, slipped through brush, and found the tunnel entrance. It took them under the fence, through a collapsed utility hallway, and out behind a set of storage units. But what they saw next made Terrence stop cold. Rows of children, in uniforms, escorted in silence between prefab buildings. No laughter, no sound, just the mechanical rhythm of control. It was still happening, right here. And one of the staff members walking alongside them was Dr. Hadley. Gray hair, same gait, same cold posture, still running the program. Terrence turned to Nia, who was staring, wide-eyed, tears brimming. That's the Mirror House, she whispered. They'd found it. But as Terrence lifted his phone to snap a photo, just one piece of evidence, he heard a click behind his ear. A gun. And a voice he recognized. Drop it, nurse, Vincent McBride said. It's time we ended this properly. Terrence didn't move. The barrel of the gun pressed harder against the back of his head, cold and real. Vincent McBride's breath was calm, controlled. The same poisonous voice that had once threatened him over the phone was now here, flesh and blood, holding a weapon, standing on the edge of the secret he'd spent years keeping buried. Nia whimpered beside Terrence, her fingers squeezing his. Let her go, Terrence said quietly. Vincent chuckled. Always the martyr. It's almost poetic. In front of them, Dr. Hadley continued walking, unaware or pretending to be. The line of children disappeared behind one of the prefab buildings as guards followed, robotic in their silence. No one looked back. Stand up slowly, Vincent ordered. No sudden moves. You've seen too much. But lucky for you, this property has a reputation for accidental deaths. Terrence rose, keeping one hand on Nia's shoulder. He glanced to the side. Trees. Distance. No one around. But then, just as Vincent stepped closer, a sharp crack echoed through the air. Not a gunshot. A spark. The fence behind them lit up, flickered, then exploded in a cascade of surging electricity. Sparks flew in every direction, and the surveillance cameras on the perimeter popped one by one in a series of mechanical bangs. Vincent turned just long enough to look. And that was all Terrence needed. He lunged sideways, grabbed a rock the size of his palm, and struck Vincent's wrist hard. The gun dropped to the ground. Vincent cursed and stumbled, but Terrence was already on him. They fought dirty fists, elbows, knees. Years of medical work had made Terrence precise. Years of corporate comfort had made Vincent slow. It didn't take long. Terrence stood over him, panting blood on his knuckles. Vincent groaned, clutching his ribs, the smug mask gone. But sirens were already wailing in the distance. Ezra's voice came through Terrence's burner phone, which had been quietly recording since they arrived. "I triggered the EMP you cached," Ezra said, winded. "Cut power to the outer grid. Local news drones on its way. I copied their internal drives last night. We've got proof." Terrence dropped to one knee beside Nia. "We're getting out. Now." They ran. Through the collapsed tunnel. Through the trees. Toward the road where a battered station wagon was parked, Julia's idea just in case. She had stashed it under a false ID and left the keys under the visor. As they sped away, Nia finally cried. Not from fear, but relief. "I thought no one would ever come," she whispered. Terrence reached back, held her hand. "You weren't forgotten." 2 hours later, they arrived at a safe house operated by a civil rights group Ezra had long supported under the radar. There, Terrence handed over the Project Vesta files, the recordings, the photographs of children in uniform, and one more thing. The voice recording of Vincent McBride saying, "Let him grow. We can always frame him later." By the next morning, it was all over the news. Billionaire tied to illegal child testing program. Underground facility discovered in Atlanta suburbs. Nurse turned whistleblower exposes decades-long human trials. Vincent McBride was arrested within 48 hours, his assets frozen pending federal investigation. Dr. Hadley, vanished rumors, spread that he'd fled the country. A task force was formed to locate every child ever involved in the Horizon trials. But for Terrence, it didn't feel like a victory. Because as he stood on the porch of Julia's house that night, watching Malik sleep, curled up beside Nia on the couch, he couldn't shake the question. What if they weren't the only facility Ezra had tried to comfort him? We did something no one else could. We exposed it. But Terrence knew systems like this didn't end. They evolved. 2 weeks later, he received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a flash drive. Unlabeled. When he plugged it in, only one file was on it. A video. Surveillance footage. From a lab. Rows of infants. Being prepped for behavioral conditioning phase 1. And in the corner, barely visible, was a logo. Not Pharmaxis, but a new company name, Oryx Research Institute. The screen went black. Terrence leaned back in his chair, staring at the dark monitor. Somewhere out there, it had already begun again. And the only question now was whether he'd be the one to stop it. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to the silent systems hiding behind power, profit, and prestige, subscribe to this channel. Because stories like Terrence's are not fiction. They are warnings, and sometimes they are blueprints for change.